time for us to check back in with the thread that runs so true. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. Coach Myers came into my office. His face was radish red. "Mr. Stuart, it's little Brier again," he said. "What's he done this time?" I asked. "I want you to go up to the science room to see for yourself." I followed Coach Myers upstairs. "You know, Mr. Stuart, I'm held responsible for these science notebooks," Coach Myers said. We walked into the science room. All the pupils were exceedingly still. Little Brier, the smallest boy in the class, sat on a high stool. His thin bird legs dangled from the stool. He didn't look up when we entered the room. He continued to move his feet restlessly and look at the floor. "Look at this, Mr. Stuart," Coach said, handing me 5 pages little Brier had torn from his notebook. "Destruction of school property." There was a poem written on each page. In some places, little Brier had selected 8 to 10 words before he chose the right one. Coach Myers had caught him before he revised the last poem. "Coach, this is not verse," I said after I finished reading the first one. "This is poetry." After I had read the second one, I said, "When a poetic mood like this strikes a pupil, he should be given a chance to get paper. If he doesn't have it, let him write it on his notebook." When I had finished reading the 5 poems, I told Coach Myers, "If any pupil can do this, let him tear up his notebook, and I will pay for it." And here is what happened. I told little Brier where to send his poems. The poems were accepted by a nationally known magazine. This does not end the story. When we entered the district scholastic contest at Acorn, Coach Myers entered little Brier in general science. He not only won the district scholastic contest in general science, but he won over the entire state. Coach Myers' face was red, but his face was not as red as mine at a later date. When we were running on the track one April evening, I thought this tiny bird-legged boy was in the way. I suggested he stay off the track when we were running. We overtook him going around the track on his second lap when we were on our third. Little did I know that this small boy, who weighed 98 pounds, was running 8 miles to and from school, night and morning, and timing himself by a watch on his wrist. We had to have first, second, and third places in the mile to win the meet against a crack Ohio track team. One of our milers had a Charlie horse and was unable to run. We hoped little Brier could take a third place. He won first place, running the fastest mile that was ever run on our track. He ran the mile in 4 minutes and 29 seconds. We took first, second, and third places in the mile. We won the meet in a close finish. In my 4th year in Maxwell High School, scarcely a week passed I didn't get a letter asking me to come to speak to college and high school students in chapel assemblies, to grade high school and college groups of teachers, and before various school organizations. I couldn't begin to fill all these engagements. If I had done this, I would have had to resign as principal of Maxwell High School. The publication of Man with a Bull-Tongue Plow had given me my first chance to speak before a college audience, and after this chapel program at Eastern State Teachers College, Richmond, Kentucky, somebody had told somebody about the talk, and the news had spread. Here is the way I managed the speaking engagements. First, I had to get permission from my superintendent before I could leave Maxwell High School. I had, in the meantime, spoken to the high school assemblies of approximately all of our neighboring high schools in exchange for my fellow principals and superintendents speaking to the pupils of Maxwell High School. This had worked beautifully. It had brought about better relationships between our schools, so if and when some inter-high school difficulty did arise, we could get together and iron out our troubles. Mr. Manson had been sold on this idea, but now I was getting invitations to go far beyond the local high school and various organizations in Big River Valley. Mr. Manson suggested that I take 1 talk per week. He wanted me to search for new school ideas to bring them back to Kentucky. I had another idea that I didn't tell Mr. Manson about. I was afraid that it might not work. The majority of my requests for talks came from colleges and universities. I even got so many requests for talks that I arranged my first tour east during the week that teachers would attend Kentucky Education Association in Louisville. I booked a talk a day, beginning with a college in Ohio, going on to 3 teachers' colleges in Pennsylvania, and ending with a talk at Princeton University. During each school week, I went somewhere to give a talk. I went east as far as New York, south as far as Georgia, west as far as Illinois, and north as far as Michigan. When I spoke at a college or university, often the presidents of these institutions of higher learning asked me about pupils I had taught in schools. They would ask me if I could recommend one of my pupils to them. If they didn't ask me, I brought the subject around to my pupils. I found that everywhere they were interested in the education of the Hill boys and girls. But they were not as much interested as I was. They had not seen what I had seen. I knew the value of an education, for in the part of America I was from, education had never been overstressed. Of course, this was the catch. My pupils were from poor families. I didn't know a single wealthy family among the people in Greenwood County. When the president and I ended our talk, I often had made an agreement with him to send one or more of my pupils to work their way at his college or university. I asked only for a chance for a young, ambitious Kentucky Hill man or woman. By doing this, I helped place 37 young men and women in colleges and universities. These young men and women had little money. Their parents had practically nothing. I thought when a young man or young woman was ambitious enough to attempt to work his entire way through college or university, he should be given that chance. And I found Americans sympathetic, generous, and kind. Often upon my recommendation, one of my pupils would be given a scholarship. I never begged for anything. I never asked alms for any pupils. I gave the history of the pupil's life. I stated the facts. This brought results. Illiteracy in my state was high. My portion of my state, the high hill country of eastern Kentucky, settled by the pioneers who had helped to make this country, who had won the Northwest Territory, and who had fought for the very life of this country in every war, had remained static intellectually while the progress of a nation had swept around them like a great cyclone. If there was ever a man who wanted to obliterate illiteracy from the hill country, I was that man. I thought that if any pupil I might get into college would graduate and return to the hills to work, his influence would be like the dropping of an acorn into a deep pool of mountain water. The little waves would spread from the acorn to the entire breadth and length of the pool. When the term paper, Beyond Dark Hills, which I had written while a student at Vanderbilt University, was published as my 3rd book, I got a long letter from faraway Boston, Massachusetts. The letter read like this: "On the strength of a New York Times book review, I bought your book, Beyond Dark Hills. Since I could not help the boy who wrote this book while he was in college, I would like for him to recommend some pupil for me to send to college and pay all of his expenses." The letter was signed Henry Lee Shattuck. I was so elated over this letter that I read it many times to be sure it wasn't a dream. I couldn't decide on the pupil to send him. I had taught 3 boys, 2 at Lansboro and 1 at Maxwell High, whom I was positive should go to college. These boys had only one parent living. They had home responsibilities. There wasn't a chance for them unless somebody made one possible. I wrote a long case history of each boy and sent them to Henry Lee Shattuck. I told him that I couldn't decide which one to recommend. He would have to make the choice. He answered that he would send all 3 to college and pay their expenses. Who is this man? I wondered. I studied the proposition. I didn't think that these boys should have all their ways paid. I had another idea. I wrote to Mr. Shattuck and suggested he pay 3/4 of each boy's college expenses. Taking 1/4 from each would make another 3/4, and that would educate another youth. Mr. Shattuck was pleased with the idea. He wrote me that he had a friend whose name he would not disclose who wanted to send a pupil to college and to pay all expenses. This made 5 pupils. Robert and William Hampton were the Lansboro youths I recommended. They were the sons of John Hampton, rural teacher for more than half a century, who passed away leaving many debts his sons managed to pay. It was John Hampton who had helped me get Lonesome Valley Rural School to teach. It was he who had driven his T-model Ford backwards up the high hills to Lonesome Valley in the night. It was he who had told me that when he had started teaching, he had tried to turn the hills over to see what was under them. The third boy I recommended was little Brier, a brilliant youth who was well remembered for writing poetry in his science notebook and for running the fastest mile at Maxwell High School. May Pratt and Helen Artner were the girls. These boys later distinguished themselves in the armed forces in service for their country. May Pratt and Helen Artner graduated from college and became teachers. They were acorns dropped into a pool. They owed their little waves of influence to Henry Lee Shattuck and his unnamed friend for doing this kind deed for American youth. It would take a book to give my observations of the schools I visited in other states. I borrowed many ideas from northern schools. I saw with my own eyes what the members of my profession were doing in other states. I saw the vastness, purpose, and greatness of America's public school systems as I had never seen them before. The dream I'd had walking beside the Tiber River when I taught 14 pupils at Winston High School, I saw in reality in America's Midwest, where industry and agriculture are well balanced. I saw the posterity of every race under the sun, every color and mixed color of humanity, of practically every religious creed known to Americans, playing, studying, rejoicing with strong life under the same roof together. I saw democracy in the making, a strong and vital democracy in a powerful and husky republic. I visited high schools from the janitor's room to the superintendent's office. I looked for virtues. I hunted for faults. I wanted to know the answers. I wanted to know everything about America's schools in every state in the United States. I wanted to heap the information up before me like cords of wood and throw out the bad sticks and accept the sound and the durable. Here are a few of my observations. Even in these northern and eastern states where teachers were so well paid in comparison with those in their sister states of the South, these unbelievably high salaries were not high at all in comparison to the wages received by the skilled men of northern industries. They were often not as high as the wages paid unskilled labor. In one northern high school I visited, the janitor received a higher compensation for his sweeping and dusting than the teachers who had spent years of their lives preparing themselves for their profession and upon whose skill in teaching American youth depended the future of this republic. This revelation was a rotten stick of wood that I immediately threw from the heap of sound and durable sticks I had gathered. In one state, one of the most progressive states in the Union, where agriculture and industry are well balanced, I found rural pupils getting 7 months school, while in cities within these counties, pupils were getting 9 months school. It was the same as in Kentucky. There was the dual school system. One drew on the big taxes from the accumulations of concentrated wealth, paying its teachers better than the teachers in rural districts and giving the city pupil far more advantages than the rural pupil. This was happening in Ohio, one of my favorite states of the Union. I love the state of Ohio because the people move, they do things, they don't wait, they believe in progress. And at this time, it was debatable whether Ohio or California rated tops in the nation's schools. I visited the border state of West Virginia, where the unit system was in its infancy. The system paid a minimum state wage to all teachers. It gave the rural pupils approximately equal opportunities with the city pupils. In all of the northern states that I visited and the border state of West Virginia, I found teachers from the southern states. I could not visit a school system anywhere in the north that I didn't find one or more southern teachers. Often I found Southerners heading Northern school systems. Why, I asked myself, had the Southern teachers made such headway in the Northern states? The answer was very simple. The Northern teachers were leaving their professions for better paying positions, skilled and unskilled, in industry. They were going into businesses of their own. At least the majority of native Northerners were practical people. If they couldn't make a living teaching school, they would try something that would pay them better. When these Northern teachers left their profession by the thousands, teachers from the South, who had received death-colored wages all of their lives, migrated north to replace them. And as soon as they had taught a few years, as soon as they saw so many better paying positions than were offered to them in the Northern school systems, they too left the teaching profession for better pay. Of all the Southern or border states, the one that had the greatest number of teachers working outside its borders was my own native state of Kentucky. In one county in West Virginia, Kentucky furnished 70% of the teachers. Throughout the length and breadth of Ohio, in almost every school system of any size, I found native-born and educated Kentucky teachers. In Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, I found an amazing number of Kentucky teachers. I found them in Tennessee, New Jersey, and New York. They could always double and often triple their salaries. One teacher that worked in my system for $96 a month went to West Virginia, where he received $387 per month. If one is a native-born Kentuckian and his profession is schoolwork, he knows why there are so many Kentucky teachers. In this state, where teachers receive approximately the lowest salaries paid by any of the states, we have 4 excellent large state-supported teachers' colleges. We encourage youth to become members of the teaching profession. We run them through our 4 great meals, stamp them, and send them to our bordering states, since we do not pay them a decent living wage. We do not pay them enough to hope to hold them. It has often been said Kentucky's greatest export is not her fine whiskeys, not her racehorses, but her school teachers. In the Deep South, I visited colleges, universities, high schools, graded schools, and rural schools. Before one sits in far-off places and makes rash statements about the deep Southern states, offering suggestions of how to solve their problems, one should go there to see with his own eyes. He should go there to feel the tempo. The situation is tragic. If it were not for the race problem, I believe that Southerners would be the most liberal people in America. While it is true what we hear about the education of black people being held to a minimum, we do not hear as much about the hundreds of thousands of white people held to just a little higher minimum. The Southern states are poor financially. They do not have the concentrated wealth of Northern, Eastern, and many of the Western states. Their school buildings are inadequate. Their teachers are poorly paid. If the South could have financial help, if both white and black could have opportunities of better education, this could be a step towards solving their problems. I believe this is the only way the problems can be solved. The Southern problems will have to be solved by Southerners or by people sympathetic to the South. The South must be led. The South cannot be driven. I traveled in my 4th year at Maxwell High School more than I ever traveled in my life. I paid my way by the small honorariums I received for speaking. I rode the trains across the flatlands of the Midwest when the corn was green and when it was buff-colored in autumn. I rode trains along the rivers and through the deep valleys of Pennsylvania when the leaves had turned multicolored on the mountains. I saw the apples ripen in the great orchards of upstate New York. I rode into South Georgia in May when it was more comfortable to close the car windows to keep out the hot wind from the fields of cotton. I felt the sting of winter in Michigan's Upper Peninsula when snow was 22 inches deep and the thermometer was 30 degrees below. In April, I received a letter from Henry Allen Moe of the Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. When I had attended Peabody College for my last and 3rd summer, Dr. Alfred Crabb suggested that I apply for a Guggenheim Fellowship. After my application was sent to the Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, I received a letter from Alan Moe asking me to send him any books I had written. I sent him the only 2 books I had written. That had been months ago. Now I wondered what was the committee's final decision. I had applied for a Guggenheim grant so I could go to Europe. All I had to do was tear open the thin little letter to learn I had been accepted. When I reported this to my superintendent, I was, upon his recommendation to the Greenwood County Board of Education, given a year's leave of absence to travel and study abroad. So we'll stop right there. We've only got, I guess, about 2 more, maybe 3 more readings, and then the book will be ended. So that was the end of that little section there, though. Of course, really interesting because Jesse had to give us another character to think about. So little Brier, you could just see him sitting there on his little stool with his feet dangling and tearing out the pages that he was writing the poetry on. And then you can see why Coach Myers was so mad, of course, too, because he's like, I'm going to be in trouble for that. He's writing on it. Interesting that Jesse, because as a poet himself, come in and read them and was like, when that mood strikes you, you just got to write. And if he ain't got his own paper to write on, let him write on the science notebook and I'll pay for it. It's basically what he said. But little Brier was an interesting character, like some of the others that Jesse's known, that Jesse underestimated. He underestimated him about his running. Can you imagine running 8 miles back and forth, at the beginning of the day and the end of the day? But then they underestimated him too in his science, because then he went on to win the Scholastic, when they went to Auckland, he won first place. And so that was really interesting. Nice to hear another character from Jesse's life. Really interesting. Of course, all through the book, we've seen that Jesse really cares about the pupils there. I've got spider webs floating in front of me there, about the students of Greenwood County, and he's always trying to help them in various ways. But so smart of him when he went to these colleges and universities and schools where they were wanting him to share his experience and talk, that he turned it into an opportunity to tell them about some of his students and then get them to hold a place there. He said some of them gave them scholarships, some of them, I guess, just made sure that they got in, and maybe the students were willing to work there at the university or the college, sort of like at Brier. If you're familiar with Brier College in Kentucky, that's set up on a work program like that. So really just true to character of Jesse to figure out a way while he was there to definitely enjoy, I guess, telling his story and talking about education and talking about his personal life and his writings and everything, but also to make sure that he was really doing something for his pupils back at home. Really interesting, always Jesse doing that, and that's an interesting way to do it. I'm glad he thought of it. I loved when he was talking about that his hopes was when he done that and those pupils would go and they would be successful. And I love how he described that would be like dropping an acorn into a deep pool of mountain water. I love that. I love that so much because I've played in the creek so much, played in bodies of water here in the mountains, but especially the creeks. Sometimes there'll be a deep calm pool and you can drop something in it and those waves, little small ripples go out. The pond that we used to have here in the holler, it's gone now, but same there. You could skip rocks or throw something in it and see the little ripples go out. So I really, really loved that, how he described it. And then how wonderful Henry Lee Shudock, that he was going to give the scholarships. Even then, Jesse's really, you can tell, frugal he's had to be. So he's like, how could I work that out so that maybe we could help even more kids? So he's like, well, we don't want to just give it to them. They could work 1/4 of it out and still be blessed by the 3/4, and then that would give us enough to do that for one more person. So really smart of Jesse. And then Henry Lee there had a friend. He didn't want to say who it was, but then they offered to pay for one more. So that was amazing. So he ended up with that. All of those getting to go to college because of that. And really it's because of Jesse's book. So he read the book, seen a review about it, decided he'd get the book and read it, and then he liked it so much and was moved by it that he said, I can't help him. He's already through college, but who could I help in his community? So that's how Jesse's the reason for that. For those kids, again, kind of a roundabout way, but still the reason that they got to go to college. I liked when he was saying that he went to all of those, when he was going to all the different places and traveling, he was stacking up information like cordwood. I liked that. That's a saying that I've heard my whole life. Maybe even just talking about, there's so many people there, they stacked up like cordwood, just using that as to describe a lot of information or people or whatever it is, stacked up. He was keeping track of it. It's interesting to hear him talk about traveling all over and the different things he learned and seen. And of course, when he's talking about the South, you got to remember this is before, like way before any civil rights or anything like that had happened. So he's way back there, way back in the 30s, I would guess, at that time, and maybe even up into the 40s by then. But so way prior to all of that. So interesting to imagine him riding the train and going all these different places. And I like to think about, did those people receive him like the Eastern College that we read about last time, how they all laughed at him? I do think it was just his humorous, that he was just one of those people that was a good storyteller, that was probably it. But you've got to wonder if they received him that same way. And then we get to the very end, and Jesse's life's going to take a different turn, right? He applied for this fellowship. Sneaky, he didn't even tell us he applied for it, did he? But he'd applied for it, and now he finds out months and months later that he got it. So now he's going to go off to Europe, I guess. So we're going to have to continue reading to see if he tells us anything about that or if he just skips right over it. Please leave a comment and tell me what jumped out at you about this part if you're like me and you really liked hearing about the boy there in the science class, Little, and about him being able to run so fast. And again, Jesse, I like that about him. He admits when he's wrong. So he's like, you need to just move out of the way and get out of our way because we're running. And then it turned out he was the best runner of all. So tell me if that was your favorite part or if it was something else. And I hope you'll drop back by next Friday and see what happens next. Like I said, we've only got for sure 2, maybe 3, depending on how it breaks up as I'm reading it, left before we'll be finished with this book.